Okay, so very good morning to all. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I'm gonna discuss something which everyone can be benefited from studying. It is rewarding as it is something which which could come up in exams, but I would say that we should. This is something which all we should aware about. Most of us after graduation will seek for a job, most probably involving tech somewhere. So you will be trying to keep your system secure, and if not the least, at least study it for the sake of your own privacy and security. This is something which you have not studied so far in the operating system, and it is not related with the operating systems, to be honest. This is something which slightly bends towards cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is something which is rewarding because no computer is secure, including yours. A question may arise that why worry about a problem that you cannot fix? I mean, because fixing something related to security is, I would say that you require to know every bit about of your system. You need to know how the system actually works. If something has been misconfigured or it has been a fault of yours that you have misconfigured your devices, so I would say you are responsible for the problem which may arise. So a question may arise that I'm not gonna dive deep into my system, I'm just gonna use it, so why should I be studying? So I would say at least study it for, because your system could be there is nothing which is known as absolute secure. Your system could be secure or could be less secure, so the more secure you are, the less of a target you are. So let's begin with security. I'll go with the basic definition here. Security is a measure of confidence that the integrity of a system and its data will be preserved. Of course, we use computers for a purpose, that is, it should retain our data and it should also able to recall it when we need it. So that's why computers are considered as the ideal worker, because they don't they have a good memory, good capacity to recall things and do massive calculations. So you should keep your system secure, and a system is considered more secure if you have configured it properly. So let's proceed further. In our discussion of security, I would like to tell you about few terms. The few terms which are very frequently occurred. The terms which include intruder, hacker, and attacker for those who attempt to breach the security. In addition, we will also encounter threat. Threat is the potential for a system violation, such as the discovery of a vulnerability, whereas an attack is considered to an attempt to break the security. Now let's look at some broad classification of security breach. Breach of confidentiality. This type of violation involves unauthorized reading of data. Typically, a breach of confidentiality is the goal of an intruder. Please pardon me for the background noises, I cannot do anything about that. Now the another category is breach of integrity. This violation involves unauthorized modification of data. Generally, it involves manipulation of records. Someone from you, if you can modify the records of a university database where our grades are stored, then this would be a breach of integrity. Now what happens is, usually attacks are not coupled. An attack may or may not come under multiple classifications, since hacking into a system requires you to, let's say, steal passwords. So that is something which you have gone through breach of confidentiality. So this is something we should remember, that we cannot categorize a violation into a single category, right? So let's proceed further. The third one is breach of availability. This violation involves unauthorized destruction of data. And what I mean by is unauthorized destruction is an example you can think of as website defacement. And this is not to be confused with the denial of service attacks. Denial of service is something which is fairly related to web only, but this is not the breach of availability. So now let's move further. That is theft of service. This violation involves unauthorized use of resources. The theft of service. So this violation involves unauthorized use of resources. Now here is something interesting. Most of you have heard about blockchains. I think so. Chances are you might be knowing that what is this, or you may have at least encountered famous terms like cryptocurrencies or the king itself, Bitcoin. Some of you may disregard my opinion of calling Bitcoin as the king, but that's my personal opinion. You may have your own. So there were few papers published stating a blockchain like protocol in 1982. But there was a man named as Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. He was the one who invented the blockchain. So he doesn't own it. I mean, by inventing it means I'm just saying that he has invented the protocol. Nobody owns a blockchain either. So for those who are curious who was Satoshi Nakamoto, the identity still remains unknown. So a theft of service could be like someone mining Bitcoin on your resources, on your computer, because your computer could be serving to some another person who wants to mine some Bitcoin to earn some extra income. Now the last one is denial of service attack. Denial of service, this is a very, I would say very, this is something which impresses me a lot, because this violation involves preventing legitimate use of the system. Denial of service attacks are sometimes accidental, or I could say that this is hard to even differentiate whether it was an attack or a sudden burst of genuine traffic. The famous hacking activist group Anonymous, I think you all know about them, calls a DDoS attack as their way to protest. So it is really hard to differentiate whether your server has encountered, is facing a denial of service attack. Generally, a denial of service attack is not performed using a simple computer, I mean single computer. There is a botnet which is sitting somewhere right there. So the botnets has many zombie systems, which I will discuss as we move further. So there could be, this could be the possibility that denial of service may become a distributed denial of service attack. So far so good. Am I audible? One common attack is masquerading, in which the attacker pretends to be a trusted third party. A variation of this is a man in the middle attack, in which the attacker masquerades as both the ends of the conversation to the two targets. I'll discuss about the man in the middle later on also. This is something which I think we should lay more emphasis. A replay attack is the second category, second classification. So a replay attack involves repeating a valid transmission. Sometimes this can be the entire attack, I mean, such as repeating a request for a money transfer. And when requesting for a money transfer, the attacker might have manipulated the data. I mean, the original recipient of the money, he will replace himself with that. Okay. So this was another. Now third comes is the man in the middle attack. For man in the middle, I have I have encountered, I mean, this was the figure which I copied from the book. So this is, as you can see, this is a normal connection over there. This is a sender, and here is the receiver. Then the attacker, now it tries to intercept the connection, and then it goes into like he tells the receiver that he is the sender, and he tells the sender that he is the receiver. So now the communication is being intercepted by the attacker, and he becomes the sender and the receiver for both the terminals. So now the people involved in the connection are not aware about it. So it's really hard to differentiate whether or connection is being intercepted or not. Now this is something I would like to tell you all about. We all try to get something for free. I mean, I know most of you don't, but actually when I was younger, so what I did is I wanted free internet. So I searched, I googled about it a lot. Then there were some tips over there that you could go to a cafe and some other places which offer public Wi-Fi. So I would say rather do not try to seek something for free. There is nothing free in this world. Either you are the product, or someone who is offering you something free might want some favor from you. So when you go into a cafe and you try to use their Wi-Fi, so there is a high possibility that someone may have acted as a router. I mean, everything in the connection happens on the basis of trust. When you send a message to someone through internet, the message is received by every person, and only the one who claims and who successfully authenticates himself as he is the receiver is only the final recipient of the message. So this is how someone can intercept. Someone can claim that he is the router when you try to get free internet in cafe. So whatever you might be sending to him could be intercepted by that person. So please make sure that avoid doing transactions over such free internet services until unless you are not very sure about what place you are, what kinds of people come up there. So something which same goes with the thieves. Consider a bicycle thief. He has either two options to steal a bike with a padlock or a bike without a padlock. So he may surely can steal both of them since he's a thief, but he will find that the bike without the padlock is more of an easy target. So we may try to keep our system as secure as we can. So there are 4 levels at which a system can be protected. First one is physical, second is human, third is operating system, and fourth one is network. Now the easiest way to steal the data is to pocket the backup tapes. Also to access the root console will often give the user special privileges, such as rebooting the system, which you do not want, and or it may be he may plug in a USB ducky. USB ducky, you can Google about that later on. And even general access to the terminals in a computer room offers opportunities for an attacker, because a physical access to your machine is something which you do not want. There can be the possibility of the attacks that can be performed rises exponentially. Now the second category is human, and I would say that this is the weakest link in the security. The system is as weak as the weakest link in the chain. So we may try to ensure that the security at each level is intact. So there is some concern that the humans are also allowed to access to a system and that they cannot be coerced into breaching security. However, over the past few years we have seen more and more attacks are made, and that is via social engineering, which basically means fooling trustworthy people into accidentally breaching security. One of the example could be phishing, which involves sending an innocent looking email or a website designed to fool people into revealing confidential information. If you have done online transactions using banking or somewhere, so there is a strict warning written over there that kindly assure that be aware of phishing attacks, and kindly make sure that you are not redirected to our website via some third party link. You may visit our website via direct links only. So we must try, if you are to perform some banking transactions, try to Google that first and then go to the secure link rather than using some third party links to dive into the website. Because most of the time what happens is we visit a website and we are not aware about here's the sign, if you can see. So this says that this website is secured. So this is something and generally it involves also a certificate with them. So this is a valid website. So you can also make sure that the website you are visiting for the transaction is valid. This is certification which we will encounter later. Let's move further. And so also the the dumpster diving, as I've mentioned here, dumpster diving, it involves the searching of trash or other location that passwords are written down. Now most of you might be thinking that we don't write passwords, so we are not that much likable to be a victim. But I would say that passwords that are too hard to remember, or which are supposed to change frequently. For example, if I consider myself, I am supposed to change my banking password within every 45 days. So it's really hard for me to remember the passwords each time. So what I do is I store them in some random file name. So this is also a vulnerability. I mean, I would say that my password could be stolen, but I assure that nobody has access to my PCs. Now let's move to the fourth category. This is the third category, operating system. The OS must protect itself from security breaches such as I would say memory access violations, stack overflow violations, such as an OS can be a culprit if it is not much secured about the privileges it grants to its user. So with the earlier version of Windows, I've used Windows XP a lot. Then life has got some other plans for me, so I was engaged somewhere else. So I didn't bother about the advancement which was taking place. So I missed out Windows Vista, but Windows 7 I was quite, I was using that system a bit enough. But the problem which I felt like was with the default privileges of the earlier version of Windows. If you may have followed some tutorial which tells you need to run this, and some kind of how to do tutorial, if you may Google. So somewhere they will say, okay, right click this and run it as an administrator. So that is what it is known as privilege escalation. And OS differentiates between an escalated request and a normal user request by a mode bit, which you have studied in the first chapter if you remember. A mode bit is something which is associated with each system call, so that the operating system may be able to differentiate. At least there are 2 mode bits at least, but there can be many. For example, Intel has 4 0 1 2 3 4 mode bits to differentiate between the levels of the request. So now this has improved a bit. I mean, this is something which if you read the book, you will come to know about the principle of least privilege. So OS must ensure that the least privilege is provided to all the users until and unless they don't really require their privilege to be escalated. And that is now the last is network intercepted communications, etc. As network communications become ever more important and pervasive in modern computing environment, it becomes more important to protect this area of the system. So this is a growing area of concern as wireless communications and portable devices become more and more prevalent. Let's move further to our presentation. So program threats are common to, I would say, modern threats. Only a few are discussed here. A program that acts in a, I would say, malicious manner rather than simply performing what it is stated to do is called a threat. And one of the famous categories is Trojan horse. If this program is executed in some another domain, it can escalate its privileges. And an example, if I would say that, consider a mobile app that purports to provide some nav functionality, say a flashlight app, but in the meanwhile it may access to the user contacts and messages and may smuggle them to some remote server. So this is what a Trojan horse or spyware is, what they actually do. Not going into the much detail, I would quickly discuss some of the various possibilities which could be there. Now the other would be a trapdoor. A trapdoor is, I would say, something which is a designer or a programmer deliberately inserts a security hole so they can later have access to the systems. There was a incident which you guys remember that once there was a terrorist was there and he was using iPhone, so Apple denied the agencies to unlock the iPhone because this would be a compromise with the security. Users buy iPhone and other stuff because they believe in the security that their data will be integrated. So a trapdoor could have been planted in an operating system or somewhere where only the programmer of that system is able to access that system. Since there's a possibility of trapdoors, if you know that this system might be compromised, so it goes into an untrustworthy state. So that system cannot be trusted again. And even the backup tapes you may contain a copy of some cleverly hidden trapdoors. A clever trapdoor could be inserted into a compiler. It was mentioned in the book, so that's why I'm quoting here. And I found it very interesting that any programs compiled with a compromised compiler would contain a security hole. This is especially dangerous because inspection of the code being compiled will not reveal any problems. And this actually happened in 2015. A malware that targets Apple's Xcode compiler. For those of you who don't know about what is Apple's Xcode, it is an integrated development environment which most of us have. I think definitely have. I have also got one from Microsoft Visual Studio. So Apple Xcode compiler is used for creating apps for Apple PCs, Mac OS. So what happened is someone infected the compiler itself, and other software developers, what they did, they downloaded the infected version. So all those compilers, all those IDs were compromised who were not downloaded directly from the Apple. So we must make sure that we download something from, if you are about to download something which is some compilers, or I would say to prefer downloading from a trusted source rather than from an unknown website which you may not be knowing, or which have less trust, or which has been there in the past for a very few time. Another could be logic bombs. It is a type of backdoor. One network administrator can have a destructive reconfiguration of I would say his company's network. So when the network detects that he's no longer employed at the company, a logic bomb could be fired up and the whole system can be destroyed. I mean, there must be some kind of, there are some certain conditions that if met, the logic bomb will cause some files to be deleted or some misconfiguration to happen. So ultimately the a company would be harmed by that. And another one is stack and buffer overflow. So this is a very, I would say, stack and buffer overflows are low level exploits, which is something I think we should not discuss here, because, and for the sake of completeness, I would say buffer and stack overflows attack is something which, when we are supplied with a when a buffer, see, whenever a program runs, limited amount of memory is being allotted to it, and if it requires some buffer, if it requires some stack, so that stack is being allotted. So what happens is, if the stack buffer is filled with data supplied from an untrusted user, then that user can corrupt the stack in such a way to inject executable code into the running program and take control of the process. This is one of the oldest and more reliable methods for attackers to gain unauthorized access to a computer. This is really interesting. I mean, this is not something which script kiddies do. Now, what are script kiddies? Script kiddies are those self-proclaimed hackers who call themselves hackers, but they are not. Actually, they are using some compiled programs of some other users. They can be. I would say a decent hacker, one who has a very great knowledge, could be using a pre-written software, but generally what we see in the market, or what I have seen some of my seniors doing, they claim themselves as a hackers, but what they actually do is use Kali Linux and some of the pre-built tools in it, and they like, oh, I know hacking and all stuff. But this is something which requires a lot of attention. You cannot go and try to perform a buffer overflow attack until and unless you don't know how the memory allocation works, how you are required to at least have a knowledge of low level languages, some kind of assembly code at least. If you really want to learn more about it, I would say go to youtube.com, search for buffer this is a very nice video. I watched it earlier, so you can watch this video. This is 17 minutes 30 seconds long, but this is a very decent video, so you can watch it for if you want to know more about buffer overflow attacks. Am I audible so far? Let's move towards viruses. So what are viruses? Viruses are programs which are written deliberately to infect your computer. We cannot differentiate. I mean, there's a very thin line to differentiate between a worm, a Trojan horse, and a virus. But okay, so but still we will try to differentiate, because a virus is something which replicates itself over time, and eventually it will create another copy of it, just like viruses do. As we have all seen what goes with the coronavirus. So viruses are more likely to infect PCs than Unix or multi-user systems, because programs in the later system have limited authority to modify other programs, and generally viruses are associated with a virus dropper. It is usually a Trojan horse, I would say, or maybe if you have you must have read about netiquettes and some other basic security guidelines which says that do not open emails from untrusted sources, and your browser might give some warning that this file seems to be malicious, do not download. So this is the way how viruses try to infect and create havoc in your PCs. So there are many categories of viruses, obviously. For example, a file virus, a boot virus, macro, source code, polymorphic, encrypted, stealth, and rest you can read on the screen. You can also Google a lot about them, because every virus has its own way of working, how it works. For example, a polymorphic virus is what it does is avoids having a particular virus signature. Virus signature is something a virus has something which I would say the antivirus companies, how they detect viruses, they try to create a database of virus signatures. This is something which the virus left behind. So this is how the virus is being detected. It's really hard to detect a virus, you have to scramble every piece of code, but since you have a good database of virus signatures, then you can quickly encounter if your system is infected or not. So here's an example of a boot sector virus. What's a boot sector? Well, boot sector is something where whenever your system loads up, the first one is your BIOS, something from the BIOS loads up into the memory, the input output devices start working, then your hard disk is commanded to load the operating system from the boot sector. So this kind of virus, what it does, it replaces itself with the original boot block, wherever the first few lines of the initialization of your operating system is written. And what it does, it cunningly decreases the physical memory, and it hides in some new limit. So now what happens is, every time your system loads up, you see that your system, it's really hard to encounter when such kind of when you are a victim of such kinds of attack. But that's why we are studying security, so that we may prevent ourselves as much as we can, because precautions are better than cure, obviously. Now the attacks are still common. Attacks may involve different kinds of softwares, such as keyloggers. And what are keyloggers? Keyloggers are something which detects your keystrokes. So earlier what was USB duckies were there, which are pen drive looking USB devices which were inserted in your system. So every time you press a key, the stroke is being recorded, and the USB ducky can be in your system. For example, someone might try to do this. Go to our library in the student resource center, and what you can do is, you can plug a USB ducky at the back side of the CPU and just wait for 1 month. And if you are lucky, somebody tries to log into some of their I would say important credentials, then you would be having access to them. So this is what a keylogger does basically. Now, why Windows is, most of the viruses are targeted for Windows, and the reason is pretty obvious. I would not lay much emphasis on it, because Windows is something which is found in every 8 out of 10 computers in the world. Although this graph keeps on changing as we have seen advancements though, but still I would say Windows owns the majority of the operating system graph. So, and something which is very likely, that those computers which come with their own custom OS, for example, if I talk about Mac OS, so generally Mac OS comes with its own hardware. So this is something which protects them. But when as far as Windows is concerned, Windows has to be made so that it can work on various devices from various manufacturers. So a monoculture, there can be many computers using a same sort of hardware. So a monoculture is something which is harmful. Earlier, what happened in the 1980s, there were very few computers. If I talk about internet, so the internet facility was not available at the end users, the home users. And even the computing resources were so scarce that you cannot think of playing games as you can think of right now with your PCs. At the time of paper tapes was there, somebody who wanted to use a computer, he has to use the computer for a computational resource, some mathematical calculation which is really hard for him to perform. So he would take the paper tape, he would go to the university, because universities were the only ones who were having computers at that time. Computers were very costly at earlier times. He would give it to them, and then he will perform the calculations, and after 2-3 days his output would be given to him. So this is how earlier system works. But since they were very limited computers, so every system has a different working methodology, and so it was really hard to infect them. But now most of the systems have I would say a similar set of hardware lines, so that's why it is really easy to infect them. The more flexibility you give to your hardware, to your software to run on multiple systems, the more vulnerable it becomes over time. Let's move further. So network threats, system and network threats. There are various ways to protect your network, right? How could you intercept, how could you protect your network while communicating with someone? So here, what I would say, that cryptography and encryption hash functions come into play. So cryptography and encryption, what it does is encrypts your data, and the encryption takes place with the help of a key. And I would say, let me see an example. I have a pic of that. Okay, so this is what happens when you try to communicate, when you try to establish a communication. This is the general layout what happens nowadays. Earlier encryption was not there, but this is what happens nowadays. So you can easily see that this is person A writes a message, then it is an encryption algorithm is there, and it is being encrypted with the use of an encryption key, and the user at the other hand might be having a decryption key or decryption algorithm might be there. So he will be decrypting that message and he will be reading that. Encryption and decryption has become a vital part of our society now. You cannot consider, for example, if Muskan ma'am tries to say that okay, the class is postponed, so how would you ensure that the message was delivered from Muskan ma'am? It is pretty obvious we don't need to do that, because the messages generally come from the CR, which is an authorized source or authorized person, or might be the possibility that Muskan ma'am messages herself in the group. But how do you think this works in the world of internet when the other person is sitting far behind at the other corner of the world? So what happens actually with these kinds of communications is they follow a set of protocols, and they implement what is known as cryptography. So cryptography can be considered as a service to as a security tool, and cryptography is it is same as because it is based on keys. And to know more about keys, I will take 2 or 3 minutes extra. What are keys actually? Keys are actually a special kind of algorithm which may work one way or either other. I mean, an encryption can be symmetric or it can be asymmetric. Symmetric means that a single key, a single algorithm can be used to decrypt or encrypt the messages. So such kind of communication is should be taken care of very well. You cannot risk of losing your key to some unauthorized sources. But now asymmetric encryption has taken place, and this is really done on a very far scale than we can even think of. Every time you go to a website, for example google.com, you may encounter that padlock sign over there, which means your system, your data is secured, right? If you have ever tried to notice this padlock sign, this is what tells you that your information which is being sent to this connection is secure. But let's consider my website. If I want to try to access my website, so you can see that there's a warning, this is not secure, because I am using some other third party's DNS configuration for my websites. I didn't bother to buy a certificate or some kind of security measure because nobody visits my website for sure. I know that. So that's why. So the cryptography, what happens actually is when you try to do when you try to initiate something, so firstly a key exchange protocol is there. One of the very famous I could recall as Diffie-Hellman. It's an algorithm that happens. So you may read about that in your later part. I'm not gonna discuss here. So if we talk about a little bit about encryption also, it consists a set of keys, messages, and whenever a key is applied to a message, it is converted into a encrypted message. Now the encrypted message transfers over the system. Now someone might be intercepting your connection, might not be able to make out what you have just sent, because since it is all gibberish, you cannot make out what the user has tried to send. So encryption plays an important part. And as the day passes, new encryption techniques are being evolved and older ones are being deprecated because encryption is nothing but a set of mathematical calculation. Every type of system can be compromised if a sufficient computational power, or I would say time, is given to it, because encryption is lately a mathematical calculation only, and you can guess the number, and computers are good at guessing. It can perform 10⁹ billion operations per second, so it can guess around 10⁹ numbers per second. But encryptions are something which is on the higher hierarchy, which you will read later on if it is on our curriculum. So I was talking about symmetric encryption. So symmetric encryption. So there are some of the symmetric encryption protocols. For example, DES, which was firstly invented. But so this was a DES. This was it was one of the firstly invented algorithms. It was, but now it has become obsolete because it involves I would say a compromisable encryption algorithm, which can now be I would say now be decrypted because of the increased computational power. Now what you can do is you can actually you can encrypt and then encrypt a single message. So this provides a additional layer for your encrypted message. So triple DES algorithm. So this is what the advanced version of DES which we right now use, and then other algorithms were there. I'm not gonna discuss much about them. So this is what happens. Now, as I was talking about the asymmetric encryption and symmetric encryption. Symmetric encryption I have just now discussed. What asymmetric encryption is, this is something which really makes it interesting. See, as I was talking about the example with the Muskan mem, so how do we make sure that the message was from Muskan mem? Because either Muskan mem will share or some known, I would say, confident authority will share. So this is how we make out. But what happens with the system is you cannot make out whether the person who has just sent the message is the original sender. Anybody can spoof himself as the third party. You cannot look behind the screens who was there. So anyways, and asymmetric encryption comes into the play. It involves two kinds of different keys. Earlier there was a single key, now this is different key. One is public, another one is private. Public key is something which you should distribute to every user possible if you want to communicate with him or her in the later time. But the private key is something which you should keep it very safely. And even if you try to do SSH to a Linux machine somewhere remotely, so it will not accept the private key until and unless you have written the user permissions to read only. I mean, the protection of private key is something which we should make sure that we should try to protect it as much as we can. We should not try to, boast about it or leak it somewhere, sharing with its friends. This is not the right way to use a private key. Now everyone owns a private key, so everyone will be able to decrypt your message. So what's the purpose of sharing the key? So the ultimate example which I have just now quoted, and I would say in the context of it only, because we want to verify only that the message was from Muskan ma'am. So what we can have implemented is we could have provided Muskan ma'am, Muskan ma'am could have provided us a public key, and she could have kept a private key. Now whenever she tries to communicate a message to us, so what she can do is she can try to encrypt it using using her private key, and then the gibberish text which we will receive from Muskan ma'am can only be decrypted by the public key of Muskan ma'am only. The public key given by the Muskan ma'am only. So this is how we can be assured that the message was generated originally from the Muskan ma'am. Even if we try to use the public key of Muskan ma'am to decrypt any another message, any gibberish code, this will not work. This is what works on the, I would say that this is what something which works in the single direction only. Now here comes the hash functions. I have hashing is something which is similar. Whenever you try to enter passwords into your websites, what actually happens is, earlier what happened when, for example, I own Facebook, I have asked all my friends to make an user ID and password, create an user account. Now they will try to log into my system. So how would I be able to authenticate who is who? So I would have obviously provided them a user ID and password. So the user ID and password, as soon as they enter, I could have matched it with my database which I am having on my server. But since everything can be compromised, not the retail user, also the servers can be compromised. So now hashing has been implemented. What hashing do is, hashing is a one-way road, you can say. Anything that goes into an hash functions converts into a gibberish, I would say a lengthy string of gibberish characters. So if you try to, for example, if I try to enter book, so there will be a 36 character long gibberish character string. Now if I try to enter BOOKL, a single character could have caused, a different output of the hash function. And even if somebody owns that hash function, hashing algorithm, someone owns it, he or she is not able to reverse engineer it. Hashing functions are something which is out of our scope to rebuild. You can try to, the ultimate attack method is brute forcing. So you can try brute forcing, but this is not wise advice. So far we have covered public and private keys and symmetric encryption. So now what comes is authentication. Authentication is something which we can use to verify whether the user is the intended user or not. Authentication comes in various methods. So some of the basic ways of authentication could be digital signatures, passwords. We all know we are even if I say could you recall, I mean you might not be knowing, but it is very likely that you might be using at least 20 passwords for different websites. You don't know. If I say you can recall, hardly you can recall 5 to 6, but actually you are using more than 10 to 20 passwords right now. So this is a way of authentication. Digital signatures, this is something which was invented I guess around 2009 or so. I'm not sure about the year, pardon me, because I'm hard at remembering dates. So digital signatures were eventually grown up, as I've just shown you the example of this website, the banking website of SBI. So this is a certificate. This has been generated by a trusted authority, right? How a certificate is generated, what are the requirements of a certificate, you can Google it on your own. So let's continue. Authentication, key distribution. Key distribution is where, I mean, say, okay, we have keys. Now Muskan ma'am has distributed the keys. Now how she is going to distribute also makes much difference. For example, in case of asymmetric encryption, where there is a different private and public key, it is not of much concern, because public key can be, I would say, it is intended to be distributed to the public. That's why it is called as public key. But when it comes to symmetric encryption, the symmetric use of keys, then we have to make sure that the key is being shared through a trusted network. So every time when you try to, for example, you will load up youtube.com. So the Diffie-Hellman algorithm comes into play. This is a key exchange method. Key exchange algorithm is something different. Key exchange methods are something different. You may read about them on your own. Not much is mentioned in the book. It is very summarized book, I would say. Now the digital certificates, as I have just shown you, certificates and digital certificates are kind of related. So they work in the same manner. The certificate authority are trusted party, and this can be done. Now the question might arise, how can the certificate authority issue fake certificates? Of course they can do it. It happened earlier. Any kind of vulnerability you can think about, it has already happened. We have already advanced. We have already faced a lot of vulnerabilities. This is a kind of, I would say, rat and mice game. Each and every vulnerability is discovered, it is quickly patched, and this keeps on going and going. Man in the middle attacks. So as I have told you, man in the middle attacks, I have told you that I'll be discussing something later. So man in the middle attack is something if it is an, I would say, if a simple symmetric encryption. So the man in the middle, I mean the someone who is trying to intercept your message at the very beginning of your conversation, what he can do is he can try to be the sender and the receiver at the same time. You both cannot be knowing who is intercepting your connection, but he could be the one. How a man in the middle attack works, to study more about it, you need to Google yourself. So let's move further. Passwords, as I've discussed. Firewalls is I would say, this is something which we all have right now in our PC. If you are not aware about it, check your antivirus protection. There must be a green symbol, a shield type of logo there, which shows the firewall is enabled. So this is a kind of layer, I would say, which can monitor or limit the traffic from the host.